with me now. Go with me now. I'm gonna take you down. Go with me now. I'm gonna show you how. Go with me now.
Alright, today we're going to be talking about economic growth, and to illustrate it, we can just kind of take a peek at North and South Korea. You can see that South Korea's satellite imagery shows lots of electric lights being used, and so that's an indication that they probably have a larger, more robust economy than North Korea. Now, you can probably figure out why one of them is more robust and growing and the other one isn't. So I want you to just research that on your own if you're curious. Alright, so we're going to move on and talk about economic growth. So what you need to get out of this lesson today is what causes growth. Okay? I'll probably let you figure this out on your own, how to calculate real per capita GDP growth. We will be talking about the marginal product of labor, capital, so on. And the main thing is we're going to talk about the solo growth model, and there's 3 iterations of it, where we had to keep adding things to explain how some nations grow and some don't. Alright, and this is why it's so important. If you look at the relationship between growth and health, okay, the richer countries in the world are all healthier, they have longer life expectancies, whereas the poor nations of the world down here are not as healthy and they have lower life expectancies. So it's an important concept for economists to understand, because policy can be implemented to improve growth and therefore help people. That's the goal. Alright, and if you look at world per capita GDP, so the GDP per person is what we're talking about, it really didn't change for most of 2,000 years. I mean, it stayed pretty much the same for that time period until a couple things happened. You had the Industrial Revolution, and then, I don't want to shortchange this, but Enlightenment thinking. Okay? And that just caused economic growth worldwide to just, shoot up almost instantaneously. Anyway, economists refer to this as the hockey stick of growth. As you can see, the blade is the part where we have growth. Alright? So on average, all nations in the world have gotten wealthier. Alright? However, some nations are wealthier than others. Okay? And so we're going to try to figure out, for example, why is it that the United States went from an average income of $2,000 a year to well over $50,000 a year? How did that happen? Of course, it didn't happen overnight, but still, if you compare the U.S. with Liberia, I mean, in 1800 we were kind of equivalent in terms of per capita income, and today USA is super rich. So we'll look at some factors that may have caused that. Okay. By the way, I mentioned the growth didn't happen overnight. See, we had very small growth rates from 0 to 1800, and then you can see it's moved up from the 1950s on. It's about 2% per year. Alright, so let's talk about the solo growth model. What this does is, if you look at it, it's comparing our real GDP to our capital. Alright, so the solo growth model basically says that our GDP, our income, is a function of the capital we have in our economy. Okay? By the way, this model's been around about 60 years. It has changed through the years, but essentially this is what is known as a production function, and it doesn't matter really what we call it. We just know that there are factors that will cause there to be more economic growth. One of those factors is the capital. Alright? So we're going to be looking more closely at that today. So a production function, what I just mentioned, just demonstrates the relationship between inputs and outputs. Okay? And for our purposes, output is GDP. Now, the letter Y, this stands for income, which is GDP. Okay? The letter F is just function, so this is saying income, or our GDP, is a function of our physical capital, our human capital, and our natural resources. That's the original solo model, and the most important factor of these being physical capital. Alright? So the more resources an economy has, the greater the growth it will have. up to a point. So we're going to talk about this marginal product of capital term. You could also apply it to labor. You can apply it to other resources as well. All right. So let's talk about investment before we move in and talk about capital accumulation. So when we talk about gross investment, that's where I abbreviate investment with a little g. That just means the total purchases of capital in an economy. Okay. If we apply it to our boxes down at the bottom, this one in the middle is our gross investment because it's the total purchases of capital. Now, to understand how you get economic growth, we also need to know what depreciation is. So depreciation is just when that capital loses value over time, and you can see some examples here. All right, if you've ever had a lawnmower as an example at home, over time it wears out and you have to replace it. Okay, so if you take your gross investment and you subtract the depreciation over time, you get what is known as net investment. So in our box down here, the little green outlined box, it is gross investment, but part of that box is depreciation, and then the rest of it is net investment. And so when you add the net investment to our economy, that's when you get additions to the capital stock, and that's what actually causes economic growth. If your investment is only to replace depreciated capital, then you're not growing your capital stock. So that's an important concept. All right. So why do we focus on physical capital? Well, the reasoning behind it is pretty simple. If you have a worker and then you give the worker a tool, the worker can do more. Okay. So just compare this guy here, Bill, with his shovel, to this guy over here, Carlos. He's driving a backhoe. One of these guys is obviously more productive than the other, and the difference in productivity is the machine. So that's why we focus on capital as the driver for economic growth. All right, and we can prove this using our econ class project. Okay, if our project is to move this pile of dirt from point A to point B, we can easily do that without shovels because there's so many of us. We can just use our hands, right? But if 3 of us get shovels, we're going to be able to move the dirt faster. And if 6 of us get shovels, we'll move it even faster, and so on. Pretty soon, though, if we keep adding shovels, there's more shovels than there are students to move the dirt. So the addition of new shovels isn't going to help our productivity at some point, okay? Because you can't use 2 and 3 shovels at a time. So once we have more shovels than people, additional shovels really don't make us more productive. And what we're illustrating here is what's called the marginal product, or the diminishing marginal product of capital. So when we talk about marginal product, this is just the change in output divided by the change in an input. Okay? So as we add capital, we're going to be adding more output up to a point. Okay? So as an example, in our last example with the shovels, once we add 10 shovels and that increases our output by 20 tons of dirt, our marginal product of capital is 2 tons per additional shovel. So what we did was we took the output of 20 tons of dirt moved and we divided it by the 10 shovels. And so that's how we got 2 tons per additional shovel. Okay? And then remember, once we add too many shovels, then we are not getting more output. Alright? Here's another example. We're going to use the castaway, and his production function is just his GDP is a function of his natural resources, his human capital, and his physical capital resources. So his natural resources are the fruit trees and the bamboo. His human resources is him, and then his physical capital is his bamboo ladder that he's going to make. All right. So first of all, let's face it, a ladder will help him gather fruit, because prior to the ladder he was just climbing the tree and then, you know, blah blah blah. So the ladder is going to help him. A second ladder, a lot of people will say, well, that won't really help him because you can't use 2 ladders at a time. But if you think about it, he could stage one ladder over in his coconut production area and keep another ladder in his banana area. That way he doesn't have to carry it back and forth. So a second ladder can help him, okay? Even though he can't use both of them at the same time. Now, the thing is that the second ladder will not help him as much as the first ladder, okay? And that's because of diminishing marginal productivity. So we're gonna demonstrate something. All right. So here is Chuck's production function. As you can see, if he doesn't have any ladders at all, okay, that's at this point 0, he can still produce 1 bushel of fruit. Okay, no big deal. Now, if he adds a ladder, his production moves up to 4 bushels of fruit. So the marginal product of the first ladder was 3 bushels of fruit. Okay? When he moves up to the second ladder, now he's at 6 bushels of fruit. So he's added 2 bushels of fruit. So the marginal, whoops, I put these in the wrong space. So we have 0 or blank, and then this is 3, and then 2 is the marginal product of the second ladder. A third ladder puts him up to the production of 7, so the third ladder adds 1 unit of production. And then finally, a fourth ladder, you see where the curve is just flat? Well, that means that the fourth ladder didn't add anything to his production, so the marginal product was 0. So at some point, it doesn't make sense to keep adding capital to an economy, because at some point the additional capital just doesn't do anything. All right? So, let's talk about what just happened, okay? When Chuck reaches that fourth ladder, he reaches what's called as a steady state. This is defined as the long-run equilibrium point in which there is no new investment. The reason there's no new investment is because the marginal product of capital at that point would be 0. So there's no reason to add investment. Okay? That brings up a second point, and that is the theory of convergence. This idea is that over time, rich nations are going to stop investing because of the diminishing marginal product of capital. But then poor nations, where additional capital will boost their economy, are going to continue to invest. At some point, the two economies should be equivalent in nature. In other words, the big growing economy is going to slow down, and the small economy is going to catch up with them. And so that's the idea of convergence. All right. So, for example, here's China. Here's USA. Okay, at some point the USA reaches this area of the curve and reaches a steady state, but China's still pumping their way this direction by adding capital. Eventually they should catch us. Okay, so that's the whole point of convergence theory. Now, the problem is that it doesn't seem to work. Okay, the data has shown that growth in wealthy nations continues to outpace developing nations. So there is actually no sign of convergence. So that theory is wrong, and therefore there's something missing from our model. So by the way, we have figured out what is missing. Here's a couple of hints. Okay, you've got technology and institutions. All right, so we're going to be talking about those. All right, so capital appears to cause economic growth because there's such a strong correlation between wealth and output and capital. Workers are more productive with tools, right? But capital alone is not enough to explain sustained growth because rich countries continue to outpace poor countries, even though poor countries are adding capital. Okay? So the second solo model included the original things, capital, human capital, natural resources, but we're adding technology. That's this little, whoops, not the F, it's the little A here. Okay, it stands for labor augmenting technology, which basically is a factor that will multiply the effectiveness of the rest of the mix that causes growth. Okay, so technology is what we're adding to our mix. So if you look at our solo growth model, you see the original curve is here. Okay, with K capital, we have Y1 income, and the second curve is when we add technology. So it turns out, as China was here and the USA was here, the reason China didn't catch up to us is because new technology caused us to just move to a new curve. And so these rich countries can continue to remain richer than the poorer countries, even though their growth is at a faster rate. Okay? So economic growth occurs when the resources and technology work together. Now, here's the thing. We can import or export technology and capital to Africa, and they're still not growing the way we would think according to our models. So there's something else missing. Okay, and that thing that is missing is institutions. And here's a great example of it. So in the year 1950, Liberia was actually wealthier than Taiwan. All right. Today, though, Taiwan is a rich country. Okay, in fact, their GDP per capita is 20 times greater than Liberia's. The reasoning are because of these institutions. They have political stability in Taiwan versus chaos in Liberia. Taiwan has well-defined and enforced property rights, whereas Liberia, there's coercion, corruption, and stability. All right. Another example is socialist Venezuela. They used to be the richest country in Latin America. Today they are one of the poorest as a result of socialism. So these institutions are a very important factor here. And what do we mean by institutions? We're really just talking about the significant practices, relationships, organization within a society. Okay? So it can include laws, regulations, the government, but it also includes work habits of individuals, expectations, political behavior, things like that. So, modern growth theory includes positive institutions. Okay, these are things that are good for growth. And then it outlines the bad things for growth: corruption, political instability. So now we have our factors that contribute to growth, but then we're going to include institutions. Okay, and those institutions are basically, let's just list them, and then you should look them up for additional detail. Okay, so the listing is this: political stability, rule of law, private property rights that are enforced. Okay, stable money, stable prices, that means no runaway inflation, so steady, stable inflation. Competitive markets where everybody competes for resources and then competes for customers. Efficient taxes, not taxes that are crazy high. Open international trade, you take advantage of comparative advantage that way. And then flow of funds across borders, and this is so that other nations can invest in your country, they can put their money in your country. So these are all causes of economic growth. And if we compare the nations of Africa, they are lacking in many of these areas. And so as an economist, if you want to help people, you would want to put in place policies that cause economic growth, because that's how you help people. All right. Anyway, that was fun.